All right,
Well,
now
that's
this will,
interesting.
the risk thing here is fascinating to me, right? I refer to the whole concept as uncertainty management.
Mm-hmm.
The fellow who trained me in this was, an expert in uncertainty management. And the issue there, risk management is just one part of uncertainty management. It's sort of the negative consequence side, because on the positive side, you have, in a sense, windfalls, right? I mean, on any given project, obviously your goal is to identify the high risks, the ones, especially the ones that have a high risk and a high dollar impact if they actually come to be. But that's one side of the equation. The other side is, why don't I look for opportunities that I can leverage and exploit, right, so I can get windfalls? But for the sake of our discussion, I'll focus on the risk side. But keep in mind, from my perspective, that's just half of the umbrella, right? The other half is covering opportunities. In Agile development, we are not out of the risk identification and mitigation business. Right? It is as critical to us as it is to anybody else who's building a product. And so the way I try to approach this is I try to identify the areas where I have the greatest degree of uncertainty. So in a sense, I'll create a matrix, a graph. The X dimension will be what is the probability that the risk will occur? The Y dimension is what is the dollar impact if it happens? Mm-hmm. Let me give you an example. We outsource development to a third party for a particular component. We need their component to ship our product, right? So now there's a risk. The risk is that the third party fails to deliver the component when they said they would deliver the component. And we're organizing our product backlog under the assumption that their component will show up at a certain point in time. So we sequence stories lower in the backlog because we can't work on them until we get their component. So first question we would ask is, what do you think the probability is the vendor will actually fail to deliver on the date they promised? Let's say, I'm thinking it's like a 50% chance. Okay. What would be the dollar impact if they didn't? Well, if we don't get the component, we can't ship our product. Every month that we're out of the marketplace with our product is $1 million in lost revenue. Okay. So I can now plot this on the XY coordinate plane, right, and say it's got a fairly high probability of occurrence and it's got a fairly high impact if it does. Mm-hmm. Those are the ones I'm interested in. I'm not interested in the ones that have a low probability. Oh, that's like a 5% chance that could happen, and if it did, it's a $2 impact. Okay, you can move on now. Right? You're not going to waste any time thinking about mitigation. But the ones that are high dollar impact, high probability, that's the stuff that ought to keep you up late at night. Now, in Agile, our principal technique for how we deal with a high degree of uncertainty is we buy information. Right? We create knowledge acquisition stories. So in our product backlog, we create a knowledge acquisition story. Now, knowledge acquisition goes by a number of different titles. Prototype, mm-hmm. Proof of concept, study, experiment, spike. Choose your favorite term. They all mean the same thing to me. Buy knowledge. Right? So when presented with an uncertain situation, the mitigation action is frequently in Agile, buy knowledge. Step back and spend some money today to learn important information. And the economics of doing that are typically well justified, because if you look at it, you'll say that the cost of acquiring the knowledge is far less than the value of the knowledge that I get. Right? So if it costs me one sprint to get the knowledge, and the sprint cost me $20,000 to do, but the knowledge can help me avoid an error that has a $500,000 impact.
Wow.
That was money well spent. I spent $20K to avoid a much larger error. So when in doubt, buy a vowel, step back, buy some knowledge, right? So nice. It's risk detection and risk mitigation. And in Agile, we have a very simple way, right, of dealing with a lot of these. Some of them require other types of product backlog items. Like in the case of our vendor might fail to deliver, I'd probably sit down with a team and I'd say, okay, we're at risk. What could we do to manage that risk? And we'd have a number of strategies. One might be, well, maybe we should have one or two of our people go to the vendor, work with them a little bit, and see if we can't help accelerate things. Okay. The other might be what we would call the parallel hedge strategy. You know what? I'm really concerned that these guys will not get the job done. I'm going to spin up a team in our own company, give them a backlog, have them build it in parallel. The first team that gets it done wins. All right. So you could say, we're going to, obviously there's a cost. Every mitigation action has a cost, which you have to evaluate before you take it. Because if the cost of the mitigation is so expensive, it may not be worth taking the action.
Wow.
Right? So risk is, I think every company has some process for dealing with risk, so that's the good news. I don't think risk is well discussed in the Agile community. In chapter 3 of the Essential Scrum book, when I lay out core principles, I discuss risk and its position and how to manage it. Because if you think about it, Scrum has this really cool ability to simultaneously reduce different forms of risk at the same time. Traditional waterfall style development, if you define two forms of risk, there's means uncertainty and there's ends uncertainty.
Okay.
Means uncertainty is how am I going to do it? Ends uncertainty is what am I going to end up with? What will the product look like? In waterfall, the strategy is eliminate 100% of the ends uncertainty first. Write the full requirements document up front of exactly 100% of everything you want to build. And then we eliminate means uncertainty, how we're going to go about building it. In Agile, we simultaneously reduce everything at the same time. It's meaning that the curve isn't take one down and then do the other. It's more of we simultaneously do both. Mm-hmm. And if you add into that customer uncertainty in Scrum, not only do we try to get working assets every sprint, we try to get working validated assets every sprint. So key issue.